Good evening. Everybody hear me okay? All right, awesome. Well, welcome to the Virginia Living Museum and to our first Naturally Speaking event. My name is Rachel Respect. I'm the education director here at the museum. This is my third season with our Naturally Speaking, and I'm very excited for our lineup. If you have never come out here before, welcome. We do these usually between like February and June every year on the third Thursday. We did have one scheduled for February and snowpocalypse happened, so we did reschedule that one. So if you want to pick up a flyer today, our one that was with Brantley over at HRSD is going to be on June 5th. So that is updated on our website. If you did sign up for that one, it automatically puts you on. So if you're not familiar with some of our big events here at the museum, we are getting ready to have my favorite event. Don't tell anybody. My favorite event is starting this Saturday and Sunday, which is Reptile and Amphibian Weekend. Woo! So this happens every March. We bring in lots of reptiles and amphibians, just how it says, right? And so we've been trying to connect our speaker series speaker to this event. So I was connected to our speaker through our ectotherms curator. And so I reached out and said, hey, would you like to come and just kind of get us kicked off? And she has a lot of experience with amphibians and reptiles, but I made her focus on one topic. Unfortunately, she didn't get to talk about everything. So feel free to ask her lots of questions. So Arianna Kuhn's here from the, I'm going to get it wrong, the Natural History
Museum.
Yes, yeah. Thank you. The Virginia Natural History Museum. Or Museum of Natural History. I'm always going to get them wrong because I remember them by their acronyms. And so they're going to be here this weekend as well. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to her so she can share about her love of some of these animals and their specific work.
Okay, I'm going to try to do this with like both of the buttons. Okay.
Yeah.
How's this?
You're good.
Okay, awesome. This is going to be a lot for me. I'm going to do this, and so we'll do this together. Yeah, I'm so happy to be here at the Virginia Living Museum, and I'm so excited for Reptile and Amphibian Weekend. And as was mentioned, if you want to talk to me more, I will be at that event on Saturday. So let's just kick this off. So my name is Arianna Kuhn. I am both a natural history curator, but I am also a herpetologist, and that means that I study two groups of ectothermic vertebrates, reptiles, and amphibians. And what I really love about them is they are such an important part of our biodiversity heritage here in Virginia. And just to kind of get us started, this is sort of centering around the theme of my whole talk, which is thinking about beautiful places that we've been in Virginia, just kind of starting out thinking of these places. This is the Blue Ridge Parkway. I'm sure a lot of us have had the chance to head out there. It's stunning. But since I moved to Virginia over 2 years ago now, something that's ended up being really, really special to me are these places in Virginia that are not obvious or well known. They're a little bit of what you might call a hidden gem, and that makes them a lot more special for us. And so thinking about this concept of what is a hidden gem and why does Virginia have so many hidden gems, I asked a bunch of my friends to send me some photos of what they thought were hidden gems in Virginia for them. So things that are valuable or special, but not widely known or recognized. And these are not going to be the hidden gems that I'm talking about today, which is kind of obvious from the talk slide. I'm not going to talk about these hidden gems, but if we were to take these photographs of these hidden gems and zoom in really, really close, that's where we would find the hidden gems that I'm going to talk to you about here today. And these are the reptiles and amphibians and the biodiversity within the Commonwealth of Virginia. So some folks might think, if you're a curator that studies biodiversity, and that is what I do, you might need to go to the tropics to see things that are bizarre or really remarkable or really weird or really high species richness. But we have a ton of diversity right here in Virginia, and that's partially owed to the complex physiological landscape and ecological history of the state. But without even leaving the borders, you could go outside and you could find 34 different species and subspecies of snake. It's my favorite thing. I love salamanders, but I also really love snakes. You could also go out and find 25 different species and subspecies of terrestrial and aquatic turtle. You could go outside and see 28 different species and subspecies of frog and toad. But this is not the only amphibian group that we can see here in Virginia. So I love to share, I think this is one of the coolest maps in biology. There's another species that reaches its absolute highest diversity right here in Southwest Appalachia. And these are salamanders. So looking at this map of species richness, you can see there's this one little red stripe right here in Southwest Appalachia. And we do have the highest species richness of salamanders anywhere else on the globe. So if you want to see a huge number of salamanders, this is the place to be. So they are really important to the biodiversity of Virginia, but also to this entire region. So it's a really special place. It's what drew me to here. I love biodiversity. And so, yeah, that's what makes it really, really important to me. And for that reason, I kind of feel like this very popularized slogan for Virginia, given that we have this other really important hidden gem there, I kind of think we should alter it so that when people come here, they don't miss out on what I think is one of the best hidden gems that we have. But they're not just hidden gems because people don't know a lot about them. They're also kind of hidden gems because they're often secretive, they're often elusive. And so many people you might find, if you go and turn to one of your friends one day, that they've never even seen a salamander, or they haven't seen many of the species of salamander that we have here. So for that reason, before we get completely started, I like to start with a little quiz about salamanders. It's pretty laid back. I'll even back up here so I can see everyone's answers. So I'm going to show a couple of different photos of salamanders, or maybe they're not salamanders. Darn it. So I'm going to do a little quiz with a bunch of different photos. If you think the photo's a salamander, raise your hand. If you think it's not a salamander, keep your hand down. That's all there is. We'll start with this first photo here. Salamander. Salamander, or not. Okay. Yes or no? I like seeing the diversity of answers. Salamander or not? Salamander or not? Salamander or not? Okay, yeah, it's like these are meant to be unclear. And there will be more quizzes later, so there's always a chance to redeem yourselves. And so that was the final one in the series. And looking around, I can see we maybe have some salamander experts in the room. And also, I like these were meant to be tricky. I spent a long time searching to find things that were hard. And so if you said yes to the first 4 photos, you might already be a little bit of a salamander expert. And you can even come up here and give the rest of the talk if you wanted to. So these are all salamanders. And I hope what's kind of obvious from these tricky ones that I picked is there's a lot of diversity in body plan in the vertebrate kingdom for sure. It's one of my favorite things about these animals. And if you said no to these 2, you're also correct. These are actually 2 different species of super weird reptile. So any chance I get to throw in weird limbless or limb-reduced things, I always will do it. Okay, so now we have an idea that we're going to see some weird body plans in the salamander world. We can kind of get started talking about what is really, really cool about them. And so it's not just that they're really cool, they're also incredibly remarkable and resilient. And so I'm going to start by just saying we go out into certain places in Southwest Appalachia, and the salamanders are so abundant in some of these places that per every square foot of forest, the biomass of these salamanders is greater than all the other small terrestrial vertebrates combined. There are so many of them. We're not seeing all of them, but there are so many. And for this reason, they're really important ecosystem regulators. So they are eating things like invertebrates that are in turn eating things like fungi. And so they are indirectly regulating one of our most important ecosystem functions, which is decomposition. But in addition to this, what you can see from both of these photos is they are incredible predators at the microscopic scale. So they're eating things in their environments, and in many aquatic environments, they might even be the top predator. It's not something I think about when I think of these cute little salamanders, but it's really true. So ecosystem superstars, and in addition to this, they may be top predators in some environments, but not in all of them. So many things, including turkeys and bears and birds and snakes, are, if they have the chance to eat a salamander, they're going to go for it. And that even includes weird things like giant aquatic invertebrates. Right? So in a lot of their habitats, they are an important prey item for many predators. And so in addition to everything wanting to eat them, they're also really sensitive animals, frogs and salamanders. So I have a frog photo here, but frogs and salamanders are incredibly threatened globally right now. Over 41% of all amphibians are actually threatened with some form of extinction. And that's due to a number of things like climate change, as well as habitat encroachment, pesticide runoff, and so on. And some of these diseases as well are spreading throughout their environment. So they're one of the first things to kind of show sensitivity to ecosystem change and environmental change. So you might be thinking right now, okay, everything wants to eat them. This is a really cool photo. Everything wants to eat them. It sounds like their external environment is kind of working against them. And yet you told me that we have so many salamanders here and they can be really abundant in certain habitats. How is that possible? And what I really want to focus on for the rest of the talk is just how resilient some of these animals can be to environmental shifts and how incredibly adapted they are to certain environments and how good they are at catching their own prey and avoiding predation. So that's kind of what I want to focus on. Despite all of these things kind of working against them, salamanders are really cool and they have a lot of tricks up their sleeves. So I'll start with this. One of their greatest anti-predator defenses is toxins in some salamanders. And of course, especially newts. All newts are salamanders, not all salamanders are newts, but several species of salamander newt have incredible toxins in their skins. And they can often share this information with predators through aposematic or bright colorations, or through cool things like the Unken reflex, which the salamander is doing here, where they arch their backs and they can even show their oozing toxins. So Unken reflex is one of my favorite biology terms. And so in this case, the predator that this is displaying for is actually the photographer, but it's still a really effective way of communicating that you're not a good prey item. So thinking more on these toxins, we have an example here with the eastern newt. So that's a common species we have here in Virginia. And in some cases, their toxins are so powerful that things even like this large aquatic invertebrate with these really powerful jaws was done in by the toxins. It actually resulted in death, but unfortunately not before the damage was done in this case. However, there are other instances where one of these toxic salamanders, in this case it's the Tarica newt from California, is ingested by a predator, and their toxins are so powerful that they can start to cause paralysis in that predator and possibly even death. And so in those cases, there's always a possibility that the animal could escape to live another day and fight another battle. I think this is probably quite rare happening in this sequence, but those toxins are incredibly powerful neurotoxins in the animal kingdom. I love that video. But let's say, you don't have these awesome toxins to protect yourself against predators. You don't have aposematic coloration to warn them away from you, and you actually do engage with a predator and there's some injuries to the body. Well, salamanders are super regenerators. They are really good at regeneration. So I'm going to share an example from the axolotl salamander here. So studies have already shown that an entire limb can be lost and it can regenerate to full functionality in just 10 weeks, which is crazy, which is really cool. And then just like delving into that further, they don't only regenerate their limbs and their tails, they can regenerate parts of their spinal column, parts of their heart, their skin, and even parts of their brain. So they're super regenerators amongst other salamanders that all can regenerate parts of their tail and other limbs. But let's say in this case, those are two ways of getting away from your predators, but what about when you want to eat something? How are salamanders able to capture different prey items? Well, something people don't always realize is some salamanders have little tiny teeth. This is a really good example of seeing those teeth in the Aeneades salamander. Some are a lot smaller, but salamanders have teeth and they can capture their prey sometimes using these teeth. Other species like plethodontids that we have here all throughout the state actually have an extra set of teeth on the roofs of their mouth. So this giant swath of teeth in the roof of the mouth, it's actually what their name is derived from, that allow them to hang on to wiggly prey items and make sure that they get that food. So really good predators. But what happens when that prey item is a little bit further away? So I'm going to share another thing I think is so cool about salamanders is that some species actually have tongue projection to grab food that's a little bit further away. We think of this as a chameleon thing, but some salamanders do it as well. So they can actually shoot this tongue out of their body with the most instantaneous force of a muscle in the vertebrate animal kingdom, which is really, really cool. So this is an arboreal salamander from South America. And I'm going to show a clip here. See if I can get it started. I'm just going to jump back here and see if I can play it. Oh, it's already started. It's just so slow. And that's because they took the clip and slowed it down big time, because that entire predation event actually only spans 2 milliseconds. So that's how quickly they're actually able to reach and grab. And what's cool about the species you're seeing here eating this cricket, there it goes again. This is Eurycia wilderi. So this is the Blue Ridge two-line salamander. This salamander lives in Virginia. It's a really beautiful orange color. Sure that I can slip to the next one. So, and these are cases of being able to get your prey items, but what else can these salamanders do to adjust to their environments and become so abundant? Why do we see such high species richness? Well, a lot of them have really unique adaptations to specific environments. And one of my favorite ones that salamanders have is some species have adapted to a life entirely in the water. They never come out, which is really cool. And that's why all those tricky photos, it was like, is this an eel? Is this some kind of worm? That's where you see a lot of those weird body plans, these completely aquatic salamanders. And in the case of the mud puppy Necturus, what's cool is they have not only adapted to a life entirely underwater where they can breathe through their gills, but they also have lungs and they can breathe air. So they're kind of like double breathers, which is really cool. Other species have adapted to this life entirely underwater by losing limbs. I told you I was going to bring this up again. I love talking about limb loss in the reptile and amphibian world. So the siren, which is pictured here, has actually lost its hind limbs. They're not just hidden, and it's retained the front ones to kind of adjust to this life entirely underwater, breathing through its gills. In some cases, we don't lose limbs, but those limbs on these salamanders become really, really tiny. So limb reduction, where the limbs get really, really small and the toes get lost or become slightly reduced. And you might think that doesn't make a lot of sense. First off, we see this body plan and we might think, that seems great. It kind of looks like an eel, ideal for swimming around in aquatic environments. Why keep the legs at all? Just get rid of them entirely. Well, these tiny little limbs that they have allow them to sort of balance and navigate around murky bottoms of their aquatic habitats. So by reducing the limbs but hanging on to them, they really have the best of both worlds. And speaking of limblessness or limb loss, it's actually really common in reptiles and amphibians. So looking at the photos on this slide, although a lot of them look like snakes, none of them are. So many species have actually lost their legs. So the first is actually an amphibian, and the other three are all lizards. One's actually a gecko. So many species have lost their legs because it's easier to navigate burrowing situations or grassy situations without your big legs getting in the way. So I think that's just a really cool salamander and reptile fact. But in addition to those unique adaptations I was talking about, like adjusting to a life underwater, many salamanders have kind of exploited really novel niche space. So they have these unique adaptations that have allowed them to be in different environments to reduce competition and have lots of resources for themselves. And one of the species that we have here in Virginia that has done this is the cave salamander pictured here. So what I love about this species is that they operate in this zone called the twilight zone of our many, many karst systems in Virginia. And the twilight zone, if you've never been into one, you'll be walking through a cave. It feels devoid of any kind of living matter whatsoever. And then all of a sudden you'll feel a warm breeze on your face. And you'll start seeing bugs and you'll start hearing water. And it's this really productive area just in the mouth of the cave. So not a lot of plants, but tons of insects, tons of places to hide, a lot of water. So it's this wonderful place for this salamander to thrive, where it doesn't have to compete with other stuff and it doesn't have to worry about intense predation. And speaking of salamanders that have rock adaptations, we also have another one of my favorite species here, which is the green salamander. It really looks like this. They have these super specialized bodies that are very flattened. Their toes are very wide and square, and that allows them to insert themselves into the crevices of the giant granite boulders that we see all over in the parks when we're hiking. These giant mossy granite boulders. You kind of look in, and you'll just see a bunch of little salamanders stacked in there. It's like a salamander hotel. And so they also have perfect camouflage for living in those kinds of environments. So this is another one of my favorite species. They're all my favorite. So those are two really unique adaptations of species we have here to novel niche space. But to go even further, because I like to emphasize the extremes in these cases, we have salamanders like the ulm or Proteus. That's pictured here on this slide. So this is a salamander that can be found in Europe, and it only lives in very, very deep cave systems. So it's completely underground. It's a subterranean animal. And you can see from this photo, one adaptation to that underground lifestyle, devoid of any light whatsoever, is to lose all your pigmentation and even your eyes. Because it turns out it doesn't need its eyes because all of its other sensory capabilities, including being able to sense other things in the water, are so heightened. And what's cool about this animal, it doesn't see a lot of food down there, is that they can go up to 10 years without eating anything and not die. And they can live over 50 years. So they've been studying these for a long time now because it was like, something's going on here. We gotta harness that and go to outer space. But so the ulm is really, really cool, very extreme adaptation to this subterranean environment. But for animals that aren't necessarily exploiting these very, very restricted, specialized spaces, they also have a lot of cool adaptations just to their natural environments. They're very resilient to temperature and climate changes. So this is our spotted salamander, an animal that hopefully everyone's maybe had the chance to see crossing the roads or migrating to vernal ponds just in the past couple of weeks. And so what I love about these species is they're really cold tolerant, which is a big deal because these salamanders are already ectotherms. So they need external heat to stay warm, and yet they're very, very good at regulating their metabolism and navigating things like snow to get to those vernal pool environments. And to go even more extreme, some salamanders can actually freeze the liquid in their body, almost like a little salamander popsicle, when conditions get so cold. So this is a salamander found in Siberia, and it can survive in temperatures as low as -55°C, -40, something like that. And so that's like a really extreme case of being able to live in a really, really cold environment as a salamander that needs external heat to survive. And so survival mechanisms, in addition to these ones where they're resistant to their external environments, have to do with their life cycles and their dependence on water. So water and salamanders, these two things go together for most species. They start out as an egg, so a little embryo inside of an egg, and they already are starting to look like tiny little salamanders. We can see external gills. These eggs will hatch in aquatic environments, and often they'll enter a second life cycle phase, which is the larva. So you'll often see little gills centered around the head here. They'll start to sprout limbs, and they'll hang out in this aquatic environment until they metamorphose into a terrestrial salamander, like this tiger salamander pictured here. Not all, but most of them do this. And what's really cool is this species and many other species have metamorphic plasticity. So if environmental conditions are getting bad, let's say you are a larvae and their pond starts drying up a lot faster than you were ready for, they can turn off and on certain genes and become a metamorphic adult much faster or slower depending on external conditions. And some will even stay as a forever baby in this pond and never metamorphose into an adult, which is really cool. A species that takes that a little bit further to resist changes in its external environment is the eastern newt. This one doesn't get enough credit for being such a cool species because we see it all the time. But what I love about this species is it hatches out of that egg just like the other salamander pictured here. And then it becomes a terrestrial juvenile. So these little red Fs that we see walking around on the forest floor after it rains. And it can hang out in this little F phase for 2 to 7 years. So if things aren't going well and it's not ready to go back into the water, it hangs out as an F for longer looking for food. And then it enters the water and becomes a sexually mature adult, and breeding takes place in this aquatic environment. So if you've seen this and you've seen this, same species, same spots, but very different. Its whole body plan has been rearranged and the tail has flattened, the body's elongated, and it's adapted for swimming now. But what's cool about the eastern newt, so this is just a photo of those aquatic adults underwater at my friend's pond, is that they can go back an additional time into a terrestrial phase if things are bad. So if your aquatic environment is starting to dry up, it's not going to be a good place for you to breed, you can actually metamorphose back into a terrestrial phase where you can hang out for a bit until things get better, in a kind of estivation phase where you're not moving very much. So we're getting to the part of the talk where you might be thinking, I've seen a lot of species on this page or in this talk that I have never seen, and yet I live in Virginia. How could that be? Well, the truth is that many species of salamander are very, very small. They looked kind of big on the screen, but many of them are so tiny. In fact, one of the smallest species in the world lives in Virginia. So this is the northern pygmy salamander pictured here. Small as a penny, they're very tiny. And yet there are other species like the cryptobranchus or the hellbender. This is the largest species of salamander in North America. And its close relatives in Japan and China can reach 2 meters long. So that's a pretty big species to accidentally not see. But the reality is about a lot of these species is crypsis, or being very hidden, a true hidden gem characteristic, is to be not easy to see in their environments. So if you were looking near a hellbender environment, but you weren't wearing a snorkel and you weren't in the right location and the water wasn't very clean and they hadn't been extirpated from the range, you would never see this animal. I've never seen one of these out in the wild because they've been extirpated from many of their habitats. They're very protected. And so that's another reason that you don't always see salamanders when you just go out on a walkabout. But that's not true all year round. There's special times a year, like this time right now, where some species of salamander become very, very visible. So this is a spotted salamander, and they'll come out in droves to migrate towards vernal pools. My video is getting stuck. This is also at my friend's pond, to breed with one another and then head back out. So they're often seen crossing roads or taking this journey to their breeding sites during the spring. So that, considering all that diversity and that abundance that I talked about today, the question you might be having is, why are there so many salamanders in Virginia? Why are the salamanders of Virginia so diverse? It is a great question. It is one of the questions I'm trying to answer with my research program, so we don't have a perfect answer to that question yet. But before we kind of start asking this question, there's a couple things we need to know first before we can ask why they're so diverse. We have to understand where that diversity came from, and we have to be able to quantify it. So the first question we actually might have before that one is, how many salamanders even are there? And what's really cool is just since 2023, there have been over 15 species described throughout the world. And what's really, really cool about this is each one of them is pretty unique. So these are just a couple examples of recently described species. This is an arboreal salamander from Colombia that lives in the cloud forest. This is another one of those giant salamanders from China, and that is a frog that it is eating, so they're pretty big. This is a seepage specialist. It's a siren found in southeastern United States, and some other species from that exact area. So I think what's really cool about this map is you can see not only have many new species been described, we've had a lot of species described from places where we spend a lot of time. So kind of shocking that they were there, almost hidden in plain sight, if you would. So the first thing we need to know is, how many salamanders are there? And the next question might be, if we know there's some salamanders out there that haven't been described, how do we find them? And that's another really good question, because it's really difficult. And so that's something I'm working on right now in my research program, is to find some potentially new species that might be in Virginia and North Carolina. And this is a picture of what two of them look like here. And these salamanders are really cool because in order to solve this problem, I not only get to be a biologist, a field biologist, but also a historian. So we are going through historical records, unpublished data, photographs, topo maps, specimens in natural history collections that are over 50 years old to try to solve this mystery of exactly where they might be and exactly how they ended up being different from other species out there and why no one has discovered them yet. And so these are the Whirly-eye salamander complex individuals. And so we've been heading out to the field the past couple of weeks, actually. Well, my students have been heading out to the field the past couple of weeks. I've been traveling as well as in the fall. And this is kind of the field work that we do in order to detect and figure out where these new species might be so we can then maybe describe them. And the question is, well, when you find a salamander, Arianna, how do you know it's a new species? And I'd love to tell you that I just kind of pick it up and I'm like, oh, this one's a new one. But it's actually really hard. And so many of the times I'm sitting out there with 5 people, all with their PhDs in the same thing, and we're looking at this animal and we're like, I don't know, we're gonna need to bring in some additional data. And so to just give you a taste of what that might be like, these are all 3 species found in southeastern United States. And I'm gonna ask you, based on just looking at these photographs, if these are all the same species or if these are 3 individual different species. It'd be a trick question either way. So I'm going to ask people first, all the same species, all different species. It's like fairly like sort of 50-50. So these are 3 different species. So the first is our traditional dusky salamander. The second one is our seal salamander. And the last one is the Chattanooga dusky salamander. And what I will tell you is the only reason I know that answer is because I'm the person that put these photos in here. But the reality is if someone asked me that in the wild, there'd be a bunch of additional character traits that I would have to look at. The color of their belly, how much their tail curves at the top and the back. So a lot of different traits that differentiate them that are not completely obvious. But on that line of thought, sometimes species that are different look the same, but sometimes species that are the same look really different. These are all 3 species of dusky salamander. They have a huge variety in their body plan and pattern. That's why someone might go out there and say, oh, that's not that, doesn't have this pattern. They look different every time I pick one up. And I'm not the only one who feels this way. You know, the fact that we're suddenly finding all these salamanders hidden in plain sight has to do with this crypsis in their body patterns and how restricted some of their ranges are. So we're only beginning to understand the true diversity of some of these salamanders in present day using things like DNA to tell us the bigger picture. So how do we tell them apart? The answer is that we use all the data that we can get our hands on. So right now, I'm trying to understand that better with my collaborators at Radford University, some of the students I'm working with, using a couple of these different pieces of data, in addition to how they look and the patterns of their body. We also are using their DNA, taken from the cells in their tissues of their body. We are actually also looking at the microbial communities on their skins. They have a really cool little microbiome on their skin that we're looking at differences there. And then lastly, salamanders have special little proteins in their chins, or that they secrete from glands that they use for communication during courtship. That's what courtship looks like for salamanders. And we're trying to understand if these proteins differ across species as well. And so that's how we use all the data. And this is what it looks like using all the data in the field. We're catching salamanders, we're holding them in Tupperware while they get swabbed. We're also taking soil samples and other things like that. And so why are Virginia salamanders so diverse? Well, we don't have the answer completely to this question yet. I've alluded to some ideas that we have that we're testing, but more importantly, I think, is how can we ensure the future of this diversity so we can appreciate it and everyone else can appreciate it well into the future. And we're collaborating, we've got the chance to collaborate with scientists from the University of Florida to do some cool thermal preference studies to understand. This is an example of one of the salamanders in its tiny little thermal preference container, where we're testing temperatures to see, do they have everything they need in their environments where they can survive and thrive, even if the climate starts to shift? So to understand that resilience a little bit better. And lastly, I will say, I work in natural history collections and museums. That's something that I do, and that's where I perform this research. But it doesn't just have to do with museums and the people that work at museums and at universities, but it also has to do with you. So I hope that you are inspired by this talk to go share some salamander facts with friends and help other folks appreciate these kind of small, sometimes underappreciated, but really important parts of our biodiversity heritage. And I will end with saying that if you are interested in seeing more salamanders than you've gotten to see in your lifetime at this point, but you're not really sure where to look for them or how to safely kind of find them in their environments that they occupy, I do highly recommend chatting to me more, because the Virginia Herp Society, which will have a booth tomorrow on Saturday as well, Virginia Master Naturalists, the Virginia Natural History Society, as well as the Virginia Museum of Natural History, we do a lot of biodiversity surveys. Some of them are specifically for herps, and some are specifically for community members to join us and help us document this biodiversity so we can understand if it's changing throughout different places in Virginia. So if you want to get more involved, I'm happy to talk more about that. And with that, I will leave you to think about exploring the biodiversity in your own backyards. That's my lab website. And I do have a few cool lab stickers and pins left. So if people ask me questions, I'll give them to you until they're all gone. That's all. Turn this off before I drop it on the ground. Okay, yeah.
You mentioned that all newts are salamanders, but not all salamanders are newts.
Did I mix that up? Okay, no. Okay. All newts are salamanders. Yes, that is correct.
What is that difference that makes newt salamanders, but all salamanders aren't newts? What makes a newt is what I'm asking.
Yeah, so typically newt is one of these terms that kind of refers to salamanders that have that drier skin. It's a little bit bumpy. It's often ones that are toxic. But what it is it's one of these groupings that scientists have made to refer to a thing that is not necessarily based on its evolutionary history. There are many different radiations of newt-like animals that are not related to each other. This newt look of having some toxins and some rough skin is what we call convergence, meaning you came up with the same idea to adapt to something, but you didn't do it because you're related to one another. So I'll give you, you get the first sticker. There's only one left now, so it's very exclusive. Very exclusive because they're running out. And I have like pins too for people. Okay, does anybody else have a question?
This is a fun question, not a science question.
I love fun questions.
What is the salamander that you have not seen in the wild that you would die if you saw
Oh,
one?
I would die.
Not die, but you know what I mean. Like, be really excited.
Let's raise the stakes. Like,
Yeah.
no, I'm just
You would
kidding.
just, like, lose your mind. Just tear
Where's
it
my
up.
mind? I mean, the reality is it's probably a hellbender. They're what everybody wants to see. So the hellbender salamander is going to be an animal that, yeah, like the younger ones are about this big. Adults can reach, like, and I'm not counting the tail, so excluding the tail, about that big. They're called things like lasagna lizard because they have these crazy flaps of skin that they use for sensing things in their environment. They're just so big and cool. And the fact that, you know, they used to have this huge range throughout this region, and now they're down to a couple of really key sites. Can't just kind of go look for them. You kind of need to be the person with the permits working on them. And so you can't just be like, oh, I gotta go find one by flipping rocks, because it can cause a lot of problems in their environment. Things like rock stacking, super bad for them because they need their nest sites to be perfect. So I would love to see one, but you have to be like snorkeling in like full scuba gear to be able to find them in their environments because it's a special clear water system. So I would be like, I wouldn't probably die, but I'd be close to dying because I'd be so excited. I'll give you this sticker here. Yeah.
Would you, as an ex-master naturalist, would you recommend these books?
Yes. Okay. I'm just going to say something about both of these books. I have a lot of things to say about. First off, this one. I like bring this to the field all the time. My only problem is like all my students have like because it gets used so much in the field, like all the pages are like falling out and I'm putting back in. I use this all the time. Quick reference where I can see a map. We are always all out there in a big group being like, could this be this? And we're like looking at the map. So I love this book and I have like 3 copies of it. And then the second book that is so cool, this one is amazing. I'll just show you really quick what I love about this one. Actually, I use this all the time. And it's like an atlas. And so let me see if I can like flip through here to one of the pages that shows exact localities of where things occur. Like, so there's a dot in every record. Which is really, really helpful. Again, if you are in a county and you're like, could this be here? Someone sat here and verified every single one of these records from either museum specimens or in the field. And so I use both of these books so much. They're always out on my desk. Really, really great books. So, yes. Sorry, you. And I have to give you a pin. You get a natural history pin. Yeah, we're not, those were the only stickers. It was just you two. What's your question?
How do you feel about the popularity and axolotls in the country?
So, here's the thing about me. I only keep snakes. That's what I'm good at having because they're sort of like plants. They're like, not all snakes, but I find things in aquatic habitats to be a little bit more challenging. They can't like go back out into the, like you're not going to take your axolotl and like, it's not like a red-eared slider where it has the potential for invasiveness. I think they have been really great ambassadors for, like they're one of the only salamanders I feel like people sometimes have heard of. And so I really appreciate that about them. I mean, I could talk about the pet trade for a long time. And so in that sense, if they've been bred in captivity in responsible ways and they can make people excited about herps and they're being taken care of, I'm pro axolotls. I'm pro axolotls for sure. Anything that can't just be released back out to the wild, that gets taken care of in a really healthy, happy way, then I'm happy to see that. If it gets people excited about herps, yeah. And I'll give you a pin. Yeah. What's your question?
Thank you.
Watch out, that pin might be open.
Or are they already creating the corridors, the over roads or under roads to help them do their spring
Migrations.
Yeah.
So, and there's other herpetologists in here that could maybe, you know, if you have a different answer, I'm looking at you two over there. Feel free to shout it out. What I will say is I have worked on projects doing that in other places. So I'm not as keyed in. I haven't been working on migratory salamanders personally here yet. But what I will say is I was parts of studies that led up to that. So the first thing is in New Jersey, I used to do these migration events all the time. We would get census data it's so helpful when you volunteer to be a part of these things to get that census data, because showing the census data is high is how they got enough momentum and evidence to build then later a salamander corridor. And when I worked in Canada on salamanders, it was really important. They needed a place to migrate across the road. We built these under road, I didn't build them, I assure you. These were built. And then we started actually setting up little camera traps and ways to shunt them into these. And we actually have evidence I found out from my collaborators about last year that they're being used. So it's helping them get there. So there are plenty of examples of this. Often it requires a lot of buildup of the information that this is a useful site. Are there any, Matt, that I don't know about? Or Courtney, you guys would know. Yeah. Yeah. Those are.
I work in a program that the airport uses, and there is apparently a endangered salamander around there, and wondering why they haven't followed up with them. Are you referring to the tiger salamander? I don't know what it is.
I think it's tiger.
I don't know specifically about any salamanders, but
Mm.
I know that PWR is protect propagation and maybe potentially tiger salamanders in the future. I think it's still in the very early phases. Partners and all that kind of stuff, but I haven't heard it specifically for me. I know there was back on whether they're around, but they are.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know anything about.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So maybe someday in the future. Yeah. Yeah. Are there any other questions? Like 5. Yeah. So they are at the museum that I'm at right now because often, I work in natural history collections. Things are not alive in those collections, and sometimes it's nice to be able to have a connection with a living animal with a lot of the tours and interactions that I have. So they're great ambassador animals. They're hand selected for their wonderful personalities by me. Yeah. Any other questions? But yeah, so I will be here on Saturday at the Virginia Museum of Natural History booth at Reptile and Amphibian Weekend. And we'll also have the Virginia Herp Society booth next to us as well. So an opportunity to learn more about those two places if you happen to be out that way. Happy to talk more about it then if you happen to be coming. You should totally come, so it'll be really cool. I'm excited. Okay, well, thank you all for coming and listening and for your questions. I really appreciate it. Okay.
That is awesome. Thank you so much. I want to give a huge thank you for you guys for coming out. I hope to see you this weekend. If you didn't know, we're going to have reptiles and amphibians. If you are interested, please come out to our next talk. So next month, we're going to have a little astronomy discussion. And then in May, we're going to talk about I'm very excited. Please enjoy any snacks on your way out. And please enjoy the rest of your evening and have a safe trip home. Thanks for coming today.